The Pariah Nexus, a region of the Nephilim Sector within the Ultima Segmentum, also known as the Zone of Silence, a region of space that seems to be free from the influence of the warp. The Imperium thus named it after the Pariah gene, which has a similar effect of suppressing the warp. Pariah Crusade, or the Nephilim War, is a campaign of the Psychic Awakening and the Indomitus Crusade. While initially a standard Imperial expedition to investigate the fate of the Nephilim Sector, it has since escalated into a four-way conflict involving humanity, chaos, and two Necron factions. The campaign was overseen by Battle Group Calidus, which moved into the Nephilim Sector to investigate the Pariah Nexus. Commanded by Group Master Maran, the Imperial forces consisted of Imperial Guard, Imperial Navy, Mechanicum, House Terran, House Morton, Ultramarines, Black Templars, Sisters of Battle, and Legio Castigatum. Also present were Ordo Xenos detachments under Lord Inquisitor Kyria Draxis. Imperial forces soon found the effects of the Pariah Nexus to be malign, with Imperial Guard forces that landed on some walls in the region often abandoning their posts, falling into panic, or simply becoming unresponsive. Space Marines and servants of the Omnissiah complained about headaches. Void traffic was non-existent and communication all but impossible. Cities and worlds were found nearly entirely depopulated. The effects of the Nexus only did not seem to affect the Adepta Sororitas. In time, the Imperials dubbed this effect the Stilling. As Imperial forces pushed on, they were unaware that they were being observed by the Necrons under the command of the cryptic Zaras. The trigger for war came when a vanguard strike force of Ultramarines made planetfall on Mesmok in the Zedos system. On Mesmok, the Ultramarines discovered a towering pylon wrought from black stone, which was several miles in circumference. The assault upon the Mesmok pylon went poorly from the start. Warp drive failures and stealth crews meant that only 2/3 of the requested warships and troop transports reached Maran's mustering point in time. Formations of Necron warships swept from the void to oppose the Imperial attack. Many Imperial ships were destroyed by the time Maran's forces reached Mesmok, either by the Necron warships or orbital defenses. Imperial carriers disgorged waves of infantry onto Mesmok's surface. The Ultramarines, Black Templars, and Death Watch led the attack, establishing beachheads to the north and east of the pylon. 6 entire Imperial Guard regiments followed, while the Warlord Titan Deus Redemptor was landed from orbit. Necron phalanxes marched out to oppose the attack as the Imperial battleship Triumph unleashed an orbital bombardment on the pylon itself. Despite a massive lance attack, the pylon was undamaged due to quantum shielding. Ground attack thus became the only option to destroy the pylon, but while the Space Marines had carved a path within a half-mile of the pylon's base, the Imperial Guard were faltering due to its effects. The Necrons struck with monoliths and doomsday arcs at this weak point in the Imperial attack and damaged the Deus Redemptor. Only the Space Marines were able to prevent the defeat from becoming a full rout. Squad by squad, they staged a fighting retreat, providing rearguard cover as Imperial forces limped back to their extraction zones. The Deathwatch kill teams Amias and Thania died to the last, holding the Necrons back. A ferocious counterattack led by Marshal Gehat of the Black Templars repulsed the Necron forces seeking to finish off the Deus Redemptor and saw horrible casualties on both sides. Evacuating Imperial transports were mauled by Doom Scythes and Tomb Blades. The attack on the pylon had been a humiliating defeat. In the wake of the disaster at Mismok, Battle Group Calidus reeled as it attempted to investigate the Pariah Nexus. Battle Group Calidus, led by Field Marshal Vigilis Tau, struggled to gain a foothold on the world of Via Almas Majora, with a disastrous initial defeat at the Battle of Ishlan Termacast, wherein 20 armored regiments and 10 infantry regiments were encircled and nearly destroyed. These regiments included Chancelian Ironclads, Gabican Thunderers, Etroni High Riders, and the Gelzuan Light Infantry. Imperial forces were eventually pushed back over a number of months to a small region. Only after the victory on Kirist and the realization that faith could prevent the stilling did the counter-push begin to succeed. The Marshal's plan for a counterattack won approval from the supporting Dark Spires, Sons of Aura, and Harwar's chapter. A breakout assisted by Space Marines' lightning strikes was successful. The battles for, around, and on Califor were so brutal and disastrous that the losses shaped the rest of the Pariah Nexus campaign. Losses included 30 to 40 million dead or stilled, 373 starships of the Imperial fleet and their crews lost, including naval vessels, His Imperial Majesty, and His Divine Purpose. Events resulting in such casualties include the deaths of 2 million men and women of the Californian Free Companies in the bunkers beneath the Glastusian Mountains due to assault by tens of thousands of flayed ones. Alongside the many deaths, there were great victories. These include the charge of the Heskian Light Dragoons and the siege of Tranax's Hive, where the rattlings of the 337th Uphuman Auxiliaries allegedly assassinated hundreds of high-ranking Necrons, holding the Hive long enough for the Heskian Light Dragoons to relieve them. The sabotaging actions of the Hephosian Tritons resulted in the collapse of a tomb complex in the Transpacian Ocean, preventing the 78th Division of Aeronautica Imperialis, the Fire Jackals, from being overwhelmed by the Necron air space forces deployed from the complex. As Imperial forces faced collapse, Group Master Maran mobilized his reserves and tried to recall the more far-flung of his task forces. However, due to the effects of the Pariah Nexus, astropathic communication were largely ineffective. Faced with this, he deployed swift messenger ships, but there was doubt over whether navigators could guide the ships to their destinations due to the warp nullification field of the region. On Paradise 4 and Cali 4, Imperial forces suffered further defeats at the hands of the Necrons. Amidst the panic, the Sister of Battle Ephrael Stern came before Group Master Maran. The Demon Refuge requested a chance to restore Imperial spirits by leading a counterattack. Stern chose the world of Kirist, a major Necron transportation hub based around 3 Dolmen Gates, as her target. Maran put his faith in Stern and approved the plan. The Imperials found Kirist to be a vicious ice world, though the climate affected the Necrons little. Yet the Imperials did not balk, and forces from the Order of Our Martyred Lady and the Order of the Bloody Rose swept down onto the planet from invasion cathedrals. Stern herself led the invasion against the Dolmen Gates complex located at Kirist's South Pole. They were supported by Imperial Guard and Knights of House Morton. Due to quantum shielding, orbital bombardment was impossible, and the only viable route for the Imperials was up a wide valley dotted with destroyed human structures. The Imperial attack began with a ferocious barrage from the invasion cathedrals. Unshielded Necron structures were pummeled into ruin, but thanks to their quantum shielding, the core structures remained unharmed. The Necrons themselves responded with a salvo of weapons pylons which destroyed one of the landing craft of House Morton. The Imperial forces were able to establish a beachhead under heavy fire. The sororities' invasion cathedrals unleashed 24 squads of Seraphim and Zephyrim. Meanwhile, Stern descended from a dropship and marched at the head of more than 2,000 sisters. They advanced into the ice-shard storms under ferocious fire alongside several thousand guardsmen and supporting tanks. However, Pharaoh Shemvak of the Nihilak dynasty was unconcerned and organized a counterattack down the valley aboard his catacomb command barge. As Necron warriors marched forward, tomb blades rained death down onto Imperial tanks and artillery. Heavier Necron war engines drifted in their wake, annihilating entire squads of guardsmen and battle sisters. Pharaoh Shemvak and his Lich Guard intended to lead their own attack to split the Imperial lines in two. Stern, for her part, was assured that Kaiganel would bring the might of the Inari to aid the Imperials, yet to her horror, it was not Eldar who emerged from a nearby webway portal, but rather Necron reinforcements. Yet it was at this moment that the centermost Dolmen Gate exploded thanks to the efforts of the Seraphim and Zephyrim. The act improved Imperial morale and Stern redoubled her efforts. Stern was able to unleash her full power, transforming fully into the Demon of Fuge. The Necrons were shocked, as the Pariah Nexus should have suppressed such warp activity, yet they were ignorant that this power was motivated by pure faith, not warp-spawned energy. Imperial Knights stormed down from the high ground to hit the Necrons from both sides, while at the same moment Stern swept down upon Pharaoh Shemvak. The duel that erupted was ferocious, but ultimately Shemvak and his Lich Guard could not hold back Stern's fury. One by one, the Lich Guard fell, and in the last moment, Shemvak's barge was blasted from the sky, reducing his body to wreckage. The fighting raged on for another hour, but the outcome was clear. By the time the last of the Dolmen Gates was smashed, the Necron defenders were in tatters. Zaras was intrigued by the human miracle, studying its effects diligently. As Zaras and his cryptics plied the science, the war raged on. The Via Almas Majora counterattack, the Death March on Paradise II, the Battle of Vorlian Wash, each conflict saw the Imperial forces resurgent. The effects of the Pariah Nexus started to lessen due to the Imperial power of faith, yet the Imperials had yet to destroy a single pylon and were now closer to understanding the Nexus's purpose. They were simply holding the Necrons at bay. It fell to Lord Inquisitor Kyria Draxus to rectify this. Draxus settled upon the Tridica systems as her target. Located deep within the Nexus, it had been scouted by a squad of Tempestus Scions. The survivors brought with them a trove of information and details of the interiors of several Necron tombs. Identify the most significant structure in the Nexus yet encountered, Draxus wished to plunder its secrets. Draxus hand-picked her expedition, designated Task Force 14. It was comprised of Death Watch, Black Templars, Sisters of Battle, Tempestus Scions, and a conclave of tech priests from Stygius 8. They would go to Tridica, not to destroy the pylon, but rather to gain intelligence. In truth, the Tempestus Scion scouts had been allowed to escape by Zaras, who had implanted them with mind-shackle scarabs. Yet at the same time, Draxus had recognized the signs of scarab influence and knew of the Necron trap. To counter this, she brought Ephrael Stern with them, as she was a force that the Necrons had yet been unable to counter. By the time Task Force 14 reached the Tridica system, they had lost one of their ships to becalmed warp tides and had fought several skirmishes with Necron forces. Regardless, they immediately swept into action. Marshal Kurtz of the Black Templars led a divisionary raid against the world of Tridica Dissiter, while a combined strike of Battle Sisters and Tempestus Scions fell upon the Xenos platforms orbiting Tridica Fortis. Draxus led her own force in the true strike at the former prosperous hive world of Tridica Ardaxes. This was the largest of the three worlds slave to the Necron Void Obelisk initially encountered. It was this world that gave off the strongest energy signatures in the system, and from here that the Scarab-enslaved Scions had escaped. Three colossal pylons rose from the planet's surface, one from the frozen night side, another from the scorched day side, and the third and largest from the hazy band of the planet's time-locked terminator. It was towards this pylon that Draxus's inquisitorial cruiser Paladin's Shadow moved. Thanks to the cruiser's Eldar technology, it was able to approach seemingly undetected to the planet's orbit and unleash gunships down towards the tomb structures. There was no sign of the fall as the gunships touched down and delivered their complement of Deathwatch Space Marines, Battle Sisters, and Tech Priests. However, as the gunships left, Zaras sprang his trap. Green dolmen gates opened up, which disgorged flights of doom scythes and night scythes. The former shot through towards the retreating gunships, while the night scythes launched strafing attacks on the Imperial forces. Next marched forward an elite force of Necron Immortals and Lich Guard, Zaras at their head. Refusing the cryptic's order to surrender, Draxus immediately employed the knowledge she had gleaned from the Scion's Helm Vids in combination with forbidding knowledge provided by Xenorite Tech Priests. Rather than panic as the Necrons expected, Draxus instead had her force smash through the Necron cordon towards the nearest teleportation gate. Though they suffered heavy casualties, the Imperial forces were able to reach the gate, and the Xenorite priests Draxus had brought with her did their work to support its machine spirit. Before the Necrons could overrun the defenders, the Tech priests prevailed, and the Imperial forces suddenly vanished. Zaras turned from irritation to rage as the other portals exploded, thanks to the efforts of the Death Watch, foiling any pursuit. Within the gate, the Imperials found themselves deep within the pylon's base. They saw the device the Xenorites described as menemtic crystals, which they could plunder for information. The Imperials had to fight through both Necron warriors and canoptic constructs with every step they took. With their numbers dwindling, Stern led them to their destination. Letting the Emperor guide her steps, the Demonefuge led the way to a vast chamber in which immense stalactites and stalagmites of Necron machinery glowed. At its heart was an imprisoned Catan shard, powering the entire structure. The Imperial forces found the Necron crystals nearby, and the Xenorites labored to extract knowledge from them. Wave upon wave of Necrons fell upon the shrinking Imperial cordon. Stern led the defense against seemingly endless waves of Necrons, while Kaiganel wove amongst their ranks. Zaras soon reappeared with an arsenal of Triarch Stalkers and Doomsday Arcs in tow. The Sisters and Space Marines began to die to the last, taking as many enemies as they could with them. Yet it was at this moment that Draxus cried out in triumph, finally extracting what she sought from the Necron crystals, though it had cost 4 of the priestesses' lives. Upon realizing that the Imperials were surrounded and soon to be overrun, Draxus smashed the machinery holding the Catan shard. The Catan shard exploded from its bindings, viciously exacting vengeance unto those who had bound it. A few surviving Imperials were able to use this as cover to escape from the structure. Zaras immediately forgot about the human intruders, instead seeking to contain the enraged Star Guard. Amazingly enough, the apparently grateful Catan teleported the Imperials to safety back into their orbiting ships. With what they sought acquired, the Imperials left orbit. After an extended period of fighting, the Silent King himself arrived on the tomb world of Zindo to inspect progress on the Pariah Nexus as well as the defense against the humans. Zarak was met by Zaras, other assembled Necron overlords, and 3,000 Triarch Praetorians who offered him captured human planks for experimentation. With Zarak's arrival, the Necron armies that had been held back under Zaras were mobilized for a massive counter-offensive which involved millions of warriors. Zarak appeared at the front of a number of these battles to repulse the humans, offering his foes a chance to surrender, but much to his grudging admiration, never receiving such supplication. On Rorgastes III, an army of Bargantine Blaine Rangers and Holassi Sky Commandos Imperial Guard attempted to break out. The Silent King allowed some to eventually reach their landing craft and evacuate before unleashing 5 Catan shards and a massive force of annihilation barges and canoptic wraiths to annihilate them. At bosses, he used cryptics to unleash 1 trillion scarabs, tearing apart the besieged Imperials. Meanwhile, the Necron overlord Charybda halted his advance on Posse's moon in order to meet the challenge of a Space Marine captain. This halt was met with Imperial counterattack, an insult to Charybda's honor due that Zarak reacted to furiously. After evacuating his own forces, he deployed his personal warship, Song of Oblivion, in an attack which split the moon apart. Meanwhile, Pharaoh Shemvak was regenerating from his prior destruction, but enacted his will through lesser Necron laws. His forces devastated an Imperial fleet at the Geb Nebula before exterminating its human population. Orican the Diviner and his cryptics led a mixed dynastic army of Zarakan, Urask, and Urtib forces against a Sisters of Battle fortress at Vantis III. Despite many loyal vassals fighting for him, Zarak also faced internal squabblings and agendas of the Necrons of the Nephilim Sector. Trazyn the Infinite revealed the location of the Necrons' presence in a system by unleashing forces to kidnap the crew of a single human ship for his own ends. This caused a bloody void battle that forced the loyal overlord Nishkafar to sacrifice a portion of his fleet needlessly. The ruling overlord of the Urask dynasty withheld his legions, while Urask lord Karifar Lekshmet led 50,000 warriors as part of a struggle to gain favor with the Silent King, while the smaller dynasties of the region, such as the Fidsesh, Urit, and Mifhamnet, often used the war as a stage to settle their own squabbles, with the Mifhamnet annexing neighboring dynasties' territories. The Fidsesh even clashed with the Nihalak dynasty legions loyal to the Silent King. Pharaoh Vordeska was entirely fixated on getting revenge against orcs of the galactic southeast. As the Silent King consolidated his forces in the Pariah Nexus, the Space Marines and the Black Templars Marshal Rekhat Arnulf and Imperial Fist's Lieutenant Horgik Stonevor launched a counterattack despite advisors to Group Master Maran advising a withdrawal. As the Imperials surged forward and scored many victories, Imperial Psychers on Kirist enacted a psychic ritual that, while seeing the death of many Psychers, resulted in a temporary breaking of the Pariah Nexus's effects on the world. Kirist was able to re-establish contact with Imperium Sanctus, and there was a hope that reinforcements may be inbound. As the Imperials scored several victories on Tradika, IG, and Gonal, they nonetheless suffered exhaustion and supply shortages due to attrition, while the effects of the Pariah Nexus took a toll on their mental strength. Soon enough, the Imperial attacks were blunted in the face of a new Necron counterattacks the deeper they moved into the Pariah Nexus. Using their superior technology and immunity to the Pariah Nexus's effects, the Necrons were able to rapidly outmaneuver incoming Imperial forces and swiftly move forces to confront them. Despite this, the Imperium were not the only foes for the forces of the Silent King. Some rogue Necrons like Trazen and Pharaon Vordiska were accused of pursuing their own agendas in the region. Soon enough, the Necrons had reversed most of the Imperial gains and were launching increasing attacks on the Argavan system, Zeta 3 Hespes, and Vertigus system. At the Meritka system, Imperial forces were completely routed. Imperial defenders quickly found themselves isolated on their own garrison walls, facing a steady siege of surging Necrons. As the war once again turned against the Imperium, reinforcements that had heard the message from Kirist arrived. Robert Guilliman himself had received the report and dispatched Battle Group Hephaestus of Indomitus Crusade Fleet Primus and the Group Master Vikrane to reinforce the Nephilim Sector. This force was further augmented by Mechanicus forces led by Belisarius Cole himself. Cole utilized a number of technological innovations to circumvent the dangers of the Pariah Nexus, such as utilizing ancient archutech and combining both psychic and technological. The Archmagos introduced the Noctilith Decree, which ordered that all captured Noctilith was to be used to assemble large devices of Cole's own design, dubbed liminal abrasers. Hauled by grav tethers from ships, they utilized a warp positive charge to counteract the warp negative charge of the Necron pylons and wear away the barrier of the Pariah Nexus's effects. No such precedent or record for the design of liminal abrasers existed, leading to much suspicion as to where Cole had gotten the concept. To ensure rapid progress, enormous mobile ship forges were set to accompany the fleet to assemble these devices. Cole hoped to secure the region before Indomitus Crusade Fleet Primus under Guilliman himself arrived. Despite all these precautions, the Imperials could not fully nullify the Pariah Nexus, and thus many ships of Battle Group Hephaestus were scattered upon entry into the Nephilim Sector. Many of these were under the command of rival Magi, who would pursue their own designs with regards to captured Blackstone and Necron technology as opposed to deferring to Cole. Cole had predicted this would become a problem, and different Mechanicum sects within Hephaestus soon began to schism and pursue wildly differing agendas, some of which went entirely against the goal to utilize Noctilith. While many Mechanicum forces sought out Blackstone, the Space Marines, Sisters of Battle, and Imperial Guard contingents within Hephaestus sought out surviving Imperial garrisons to relieve and reinforce. Hephaestus elements under Magos Salt first encountered large amounts of Imperial survivors on Paradise. There they found a mix of Imperial Guard and Ecclesiarchy elements battling besieging Necrons. The first act of the arriving Imperials was to drive away the Necron tomb ships in orbit. Salt ordered that relief forces be sent to the surface to destroy the remaining Xenos constructs. Similar actions repeated throughout the region, and all but the rescued Space Marines showed extreme exhaustion. It was then, as the Imperials battled Necrons from various dynasties, that the forces of the Sotic dynasty under Imhotep the Stormlord struck. The Stormlord had long been apprehensive at the return of the Silent King. Imhotep considered the Necron machine forms to be perfection and opposed the Silent King's plans to reverse biotransference. Thus, Imhotep sought to foil Xarax's plans at the earliest phase. So it was that across the war zone of Hephaestus, that Necron forces engaging the Imperials would suddenly withdraw, sabotage others, and in some cases even turn on themselves as Sotic and Sotic loyalist armies made their move. Imperial commanders were beleaguered at this sudden development. At Vertigus too, Cole himself was commanding Mechanicum, Iron Hands, and House Tyrannis forces against the Necrons when suddenly another Necron army arrived to ignore the Imperials and assault their own. Cole was able to rapidly determine that a civil war had erupted amongst the Necron race, as soon enough all the aliens on Vertigus II had been destroyed or disappeared. The Necron schism allowed the Imperials to contact most of the surviving elements of Battle Group Calidus within the Pariah Nexus. It was said that Group Master Maran himself had fallen during a desperate defensive action on Kirist, though his body was never recovered, and he was posthumously declared an Imperial Saint. There were similarly no signs of Arnulf or Stonevor, though it was said that they had pushed through Necron lines and continued towards the heart of the Nephilim Sector. Whatever the case, command of Imperial forces within the Pariah Nexus effectively transferred to Cole and Group Master Vikrain, who were able to establish a solid foothold throughout the northern Nephilim Sector. Despite this, the production of Cole's liminal appraisers met with little success due to low Noctilith harvesting quotas and Mechanicum division. It was then that Inquisitor Draxus re-emerged, boarding the Czarquisitor to meet with Cole and reveal she had feigned her own retreat. Draxus was certain she now had the secret to bringing down the entire Pariah Nexus. Zarak quickly sought to utilize Orican the Diviner to figure out Imhotep's next move, but the Diviner rebuked an audience and instead pursued his own agenda. Meanwhile, Imhotep's forces managed to capture 3 full systems in the northeastern Pariah Nexus, while exhausting a Nephric dynasty attack through attrition. He then used a Dolmen Gate to personally lead an attack on the distant Meretka system. His target was the valuable world of Vergois Alphic, which hosted a significant pylon cluster necessary to maintain the Pariah Nexus. Zarak charged Nemesa Othmek with repelling Imhotep's coming attack. The Silent King required absolute victory, not only for his designs on the Pariah Nexus, but also to ensure more dynasties do not flock to the Storm Lord's banner. The sparse Imperial forces present on Vergois Alphic were quickly crushed between the 2 opposing alien armies, though the overall Imperial commander Magos Landkist watched the battle safely afar in his command ship. It was at this point that a flotilla under Inquisitor Draxus arrived in system, leading an elite host of Martian Skitarii and Death Watch Space Marines. With Uthmek's forces bogged down fighting Imhotep's forces, only a sparse garrison remained in the pylon complex. This was Draxus' target, and the pylons were swiftly captured as her and Landkist's reinforcements established a defensive perimeter around the complex. Uthmek's forces quickly turned face to meet the Imperials, and for his part, Imhotep quickly retreated through the Dolmen Gate that he had opened. As the Imperials held the perimeter, Draxus and her entourage journeyed inside the pylon complex and were able to cause the entire structure to begin to implode. Though much of the Imperial host managed to flee, Vergois Alphic suffered a devastating blast that wiped out most of Uthmek's remaining army. Draxus quickly disappeared after the engagement, her objective achieved. While Draxus had achieved her objective, her actions represented a major escalation to the Pariah War. Until this moment, the Silent King had been content to treat these human interlopers as a minor nuisance and even a degree of honor. However, he now saw them as lacking any honor or respect due to their actions against the Pariah Nexus. The Silent King's full fury was unleashed, and he vowed to annihilate every human within the Nephilim Sector. Meanwhile, Cole's fleet slowly attempted to build his liminal appraisers, but found themselves compounded by the differing agendas within his own Mechanicum forces. Many of the Mechanicum Magi were searching the region for Archaeotech, discovering not only forbidden weaponry and even Ordinatus engines, but also sinister technology with terms such as the Yactopatiklate Crucible, Devoral's Necrocastigatrix, and the Cyclofox Determination. The Silent King's first act of this new extermination campaign was to order Pharaoh Nectaric of the Thukt dynasty to assault the Lumos system. Nectaric's army were further augmented by the technological horrors of a trio of technomandrites known as the Eyes of the Void. Steering clear of Kiristes' formidable defenses, Nectaric instead struck at the neighboring world of Turantis, unleashing a massive army of war engines. Not even the warlord titan Dracos Apokalisto could stand before her. As the world was overrun, two Aegis fleets under the Magos Pezd Oradi arrived to meet the Necrons. Pezd wielded an ancient weapon dubbed the Arc of Oblivion, which was fired like a missile from his flagship Ex Machinas. The device exploded amidst the Necron fleet in orbit, unleashing a huge contra-molecular shock wave which vibrated 3 tomb ships into slurry. While a considerable number of Imperials were caught in the crossfire, the weapon decisively turned the battle in the Imperium's favor. Outraged by such reckless use of advanced weaponry, the Eyes of the Void unleashed their own terrible device in the form of a Catan shard of Ishadra. Binding its fragments into thousands of canoptic constructs, the ravening swarm overran several entire Imperial Guard regiments before sweeping down upon Best's landing parties. Utilizing the horror of the Catan, the canoptic swarm reduced the Skitarii forces to fighting one another as their minds were fractured by the endless swarm. Vowing not to suffer the same fate as her soldiers, Best activated her own final hidden weapon of unknown origin. A dark orb grew around her landing party, then hundreds of miles across Turantis' surface. Humans and Necrons alike died in the bubble, which consumed a full third of Turantis' mass along with countless billions. In its wake left a shattered world tumbling out of its orbit, denying the planet to both sides. The nightmarish conclusion to the Turantian campaign repeated in myriad forms across the Nephilim Sector. Apocalyptic reprisals and technological atrocities were unleashed by both sides in escalating insanity. On Thalcifer, Einvold Viridian unleashed Morgar Fix's Hyper-Olympic upon the Iraq's dynasty legions of Overlord Kutmek. Necron and Imperial forces alike were both reduced to bubbling slime. In the Zand system, an Imperial push upon a void-born Necron pylon triggered a massive naval engagement, which was thrown into chaos by a couple of Zarican dynasty blast maces. The Necron scientists found a dwarf star and propelled it into the Imperial naval formations around the system with devastating consequences, killing billions within minutes. However, thanks to the ramming sacrifice of the Chalice cruiser Silence and Suffering, one of the stellar shackles containing the star's power was destroyed, and the Zan pylon was badly damaged. Cole learned of the spreading madness soon enough, and issued an immediate decree that forbade the use of any recovered ancient weaponry without proper understanding and approval. However, his orders were slow to spread, and many Magi ignored the decree even after they had received it. The Silent King watched the developing war with disquiet. Imhotep was making steady gains in the north and eastern Nephilim sector, while 2 full pylons had been destroyed. His waste of ancient weaponry and setbacks further agitated his technomandrites, whose discontent was becoming impossible to ignore. Zarak knew he needed a clear, decisive victory to improve his political and strategic position. To that end, he sought to advance on every Imperial-held system, compromising Stormvor's fortress network. Zarikan, Nihilak, and Urusk dynasty armies intercepted far-ranging Imperial fleets, and the Meretka and Shintai systems were invaded once again. Cryptics were ordered to use their talents and arcane weapons to swiftly annihilate the humans, regardless of the collateral cost. At Zeta 3 Hespes, cryptics of the Nehalak dynasty unleashed 10 full Catan shards in a single war zone. While some Necron warlords pursued their own agendas, only Imhotep's armies did not join the Silent King's new offensive. While the new Necron attacks were highly coordinated, Imperial commanders often fought alone due to difficulties in communication. Cole turned ever towards super weapons, while conventional Imperial battle groups were worn down by attrition and the effects of the Pariah Nexus. Matters finally came to a head in the Scarran system, where early in the campaign, Battle Group Hephaestus under Dominus Gelf had successfully driven back Necron forces. The Mechanicum had since set up giant mining engines on the feral world of Sanctis Magna to uncover Noctilith as part of Cole's attempts to utilize it against the Necron pylons. However, the Imperials were compounded by a near indestructible Necron pylon nearby, which took an ever-escalating toll on the miners and soldiers below. To try and protect himself from the many malfunctions and ill effects of the pylon, Gelf sequestered himself in his personal sanctum in the form of an ancient and unidentified weapons complex dubbed Chivalric's Constellation. It was into this context that a massive Necron invasion fleet appeared in the Scarran system, hosting armies from the Zarakan, Oraskar, and Nehalak dynasties. It was a terrifyingly powerful host, sufficient to crush the Imperials several times over. Almost immediately, strike cruisers belonging to the Silver Templars and Hawk Lords powered out to meet the foremost enemy warships, but these were outflanked by a force of Necron vessels that immediately arrived in high orbit above Sanctis Magna. These ships unleashed a punishing bombardment upon the planet's surface, and while they took losses in the face of Imperial defenses, they managed to land substantial amounts of Necron ground forces. As violence raged, the growingly paranoid Gelf sought to unlock the truths of Chivalric's Constellation. Gelf was convinced by deranged voices in his own mind to disable the complex's safety regulators, and deep in the void, 25 satellites dating back to the dark age of technology suddenly overcharged and prepared to fire. As Gelf unleashed the ancient weapon, ships on both sides died with every volley of satellite fire. What followed next was a very rupture in reality, as the satellites detonated one after another. Their feedback was so intense that even Gelf's brain exploded within his personal sanctum, and a war breach followed where the satellites once were. Through this breach came the dreaded Wormwood, commanded by the demon smith Vashtor himself. In the wake of the Wormwood came a massive fleet of Chaos Space Marines and Dark Mechanicum vessels. After witnessing the death of Sanctis Magna, Vashtor set his sights on the region. Cole viewed these new developments with frustration, further compounded by the fact that many of his own Magi continued to ignore his orders and pursue their own agendas. He could not help but wonder what Guilliman himself would think of the situation when he arrived. Zarak was forced to deal with yet another setback and funneled new reinforcements towards these new war-born foes. While the Imperial and Chaos armies did not know it, Zarak had little political capital left to maintain an offensive posture and would soon be forced into a defensive position. Orican had now appeared in the Silent King's inner circle, his mind apparently changed by some sort of new grim vision of the future. While Abaddon is not personally involved in the chaos invasion of the Pariah Nexus, he has nonetheless provided aid to Vashtor in the form of the Soul Eaters, a Black Legion warband commanded by Drakes. While ostensibly allies to Vashtor, The Soul Eater forces aboard the Wormwood are also acting as Abaddon spies to monitor the demon. Additional aid to Vashtor has arrived in the form of word bearers and the Dark Apostle Zakis Armen, who has ravaged the ecclesiarchy-held ward of Calathea and erected a shrine to the dark gods there. The act served to disrupt the Pariah Nexus, infuriating the Silent King and drawing the Necrons into conflict with the word bearers. Magnus's eye has also turned towards the Pariah Nexus, having foreseen at least one future where Vashtor actually succeeds in his goal of becoming a true god of chaos. He and the Cult of Prophecy have initiated a plan to hold the Archiphane's possible ascension. However, operating within the Nexus is particularly painful to the sorcerers of the Thousand Suns, and thus they have primarily deployed ancient pre-heresy automata and other robotic thralls from beneath Sorotarius. These forces are led by Suleiman Kifre of the Cult of Knowledge, who has invaded the Forzar system in search of Black Stone. He has since begun plundering the vaults of the Mechanicum in the region, coming into battle with the Imperium's own robotic terrors. The Pariah Nexus also piqued the curiosity of Fabius Bile, seeing an opportunity to capture large amounts of new test subjects. He allied with the Flawless Host and struck at Restitution, the homeworld of the Gilded Suns Space Marine chapter. The exhausted Gilded Suns had already repulsed several Necron assaults and were thus overwhelmed by Bile's sudden Tirata-led invasion. Bile was able to plunder the Gilded Suns' Gene Seed Vault and escape, and his forces still haunt the fringes of the Nephilim Sector. Alright guys, if you enjoyed this, hit that like button, leave a comment for the algorithm, and don't forget to subscribe to stay tuned for more.